Hello and welcome to Asia Gaming Brief's face-to-face series. Today I'm talking with Steve Vickers, who's the founder and CEO of Steve Vickers Associates, a specialist business risk consultancy firm. Steve is an acknowledged expert on triads and organized crime gangs in Asia and spent 18 years as head of the Hong Kong Police's Criminal Intelligence Unit. Today, we're going to be talking about China's crackdown on capital outflows and their impacts on the junket industry, and what operators can do to mitigate their risks. Thanks for joining. And I wanted to start off, first of all, with the current clampdown that China is having on online gaming and capital outflows. And I wanted to know, really, where does this come from? Why now?
Well, it's been continuing for a while. There's just been a number of developments, I guess, in recent times. June 2020, when the central bank began to have a little look at cash fund outflows, was an indication that there was a change afoot. There's been an ongoing, ever since the Xi Jinping regime kicked off, there's been an ongoing anti-corruption campaign aimed often at officials and aimed often at officials with substantial gambling habits, and gambling means Macau, if you're talking about China. So that's been a substantial. So in June 2020, that the central bank began to make noises about keeping an eye on cash outflows. And then in March 2021, the central government passed an overseas gaming law, which is very significant. And it relates not just to onshore gambling, it also relates to offshore gambling, and it also relates to online gambling, and it also relates to offline gambling. So it's quite a substantial and material issue. And I think it will affect junkets in particular. And those casinos that are desperately focused on the high net worth rollers business will be impacted by this, whether they would like to admit it or not.
Does this effectively mean that the junkets can't operate?
That's another factor. I mean, I found over the years, observing these people for many years, they're very clever. And what it means is that these sort of transactions are being looked at. But there are various means that people will find to get around these transactions. Junkets have got around regulations for many, many years. There is a contradiction in China. I mean, for example, more than a very modest an amount of money needs to be declared before it can be shipped from mainland China to Macau or to Hong Kong, yet billions of dollars in normal days continue to cross those borders. So that contradiction continues to a certain extent. And then there are further complexities. And by the way, I'm not making noises here that are seeking to shift the stock price of people in gaming, because do bear in mind, as long as Macau remains the only place in China that you can place a bet, and that China likes to gamble, people in Macau will make money. So it's just a question of how things will change and what the nuances are. So it is not the end of casino gambling in Macau or elsewhere by any chance. But the truth is that the harsh reality is that things are changing, and people are going to have to adapt and improvise to these new changes.
From your perspective, if you do move to a digital RMB, would that create a cleaner gambling industry, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, it will certainly contain certain activities, but of course, the digitalization refers to the execution of the transaction. The transaction itself needs to be kosher, i.e. it needs to be a real transaction. Very often in the past, we have seen re-invoicing scams by junkets who basically do transactions that aren't real but appear to be real. And thereby, ostensibly, if that was paid electronically, it wouldn't make any difference. So it's not necessarily going to cause the eradication thereof, but it adds an extra ring to the onion in terms of making things a little bit more difficult for organized crime and triad figures. But no, it won't be. It won't It won't prevent all of it, but that plus like I say, the anti-gaming law, plus the central bank's observation of withdrawals, all make things a little bit more complicated and a little bit more difficult for those concerned. Remember, the number of junket operators has shrunk really quite significantly. The bigger ones that are left and that have survived are under greater government surveillance. And the all-important factor remains the central Chinese government anti-corruption purge, which continues.
And if you had to sort of put a percentage, because obviously all junket operations, they're not all involved in organized crime and money laundering. It's more of a sort of facilitating movement of funds for high rollers. How much criminal involvement is there still, would you say?
Well, it's back to the ambiguity. If it's illegal for only that much money to cross the border, people need to adopt measures to do that. So what sort of people are positioned to do that? Well, it's not Mother Teresa and her friends, it's other people. So triad societies, by virtue of filling this gap or transitioning between the two systems, have made a great deal of money over the years and will continue to do so. For many years, up to about 5 years ago, the Chinese government sort of acquiesced to this going on. They didn't like it, but there were, up to 5 years ago, and I say things changed 5 years ago, there were good reasons why you might want to facilitate capital outflows like that in that fashion. Up to 5 years ago, again, China was in fear of inflation. Now inflation is is not really their problem, far from it. So that's not something they would tolerate. 5 years ago, tolerating some capital outflow through the sort of virtual venting through Macau was a useful economic tool. The scary part, though, of government crackdowns is it's like that Japanese game whack-a-mole. You know, you bang one down and then another one pops up. So Macau, whether we like it or not, is a huge settlement platform associated with the gaming business. It's much better if all the gaming is run through Macau, the Macau government take a tax on it, the thing becomes a lot more legitimate and what have you. But because of some of the measures that have now kicked in, a lot of junkets and other operators are focusing on Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Vietnam, the Philippines, and elsewhere, where the regime is a bit more, less developed than it could be, and the Macau settlement platform is being used to settle in, or to be used as a key part in those enterprises. This is not what the Chinese government wants. It's not what Western governments want, because once this starts in an uncontrolled fashion, it leads to an uptick in organized crime, corruption, and the rest. You
were recently testifying in Australia in the Crown Resorts suitability probe in New South Wales. How surprised were you by that particular case? Was that a single company case, or was that a systemic breakdown from a regulatory point of view?
Well, I gave evidence on the not on behalf of Crown, I gave an independent feedback. Look, this is what happens when people want to do business at any cost, no more, no less. They're no worse. Crown were no worse than anybody else. They made some bad and poor business decisions, perhaps without a clear understanding of what triad societies are and how it operates. And you can see from the Australian point of view, perhaps, or from certain people, not the Australian government, but from certain people, if these guys want to come from China and spend money here, thank you very much. I mean, that essentially was it was clearly what the attitude was. Obviously, what came out in the hearings was more colourful than is normal in such matters. Now, I wasn't surprised. It basically confirmed how difficult it is, and how the whole junket system is a horrible system. And it's dependent upon the anomalies that I described earlier, i.e. being able to move money across the border when you're not supposed to, the fact that enforcing gambling debts in China is illegal, and other factors which get people just ignored.
And what should land-based operators around Asia now, I'm not talking about the online, I'm talking about the well-established casinos who are working with junkets and have a very legitimate business model with tourists coming from China. What should they be doing to monitor their risk and improve their controls?
The point is we want to eliminate organized crime as far as humanly possible from the process. And that requires a bit of knowledge, a bit more than just Googling, Mr. X, and doing some work. And that work requires an understanding. And there's people around my organization provide that service, who's who, how to avoid difficulty, minimum standards for vetting and due diligence, and actually doing it. What tends to happen is there's a little department in the corner which nobody takes any notice of, which is a tick the box effort. If we don't find anything on the first quick look see, then it's okay to go ahead and do business with them. A bit of a wink and a nod, and off we go. So the goal is to have a credible due diligence process in place. Malaysia, again, have been reasonably successful. Singapore is the gold standard. Malaysia has been reasonably successful. Likewise, over the years in combating these people. Things change regularly, processes change regularly. Every time the mainland crack down with a new regulation, there'll be a reaction somewhere else somewhere else. It's just like that. But people have to take it seriously, and it's not a joke, because in the end, when it goes wrong, it will be horrible. I mean, the Crown thing was horrible. It made everybody associated with it look silly. And I don't think there was as much evil forethought as the media perhaps would have us all believe. I think it was just genuinely people letting things go by without appropriate effort.
One last question from me. Going back to the junkets again, we kind of answered this, but is there a future for junkets again?
Oh, there will be. But it will be in a different format, and they will adapt and they will improvise. In the end, as long as it's illegal to raise funds in China for gaming, as long as it's illegal to enforce a debt in China, as long as it's prostitution and the rest is illegal, junkets will thrive one way or the other. The goal is to at least reduce their reliance on hardcore triad societies. And to try and move it along. I think the business model in Macau, for example, the goal was to not to eliminate, but at least to reduce the reliance on the VIP model as the big money spinner. So some of the casinos in Macau operate with quite a high mom and pop level, mass market, and the rest. Were some. They really don't make their money from that at all. They make their money from a tiny percentage of people, which bring a huge percentage of their revenue. That is changing.
Thank you very much, Steve. That's great insights. Great to talk to you today.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. I've been talking today with Steve Vickers, who is the founder and CEO of Steve Vickers Associates.